Ho, 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 ho. Well, hello and hi, everybody in Miss Lather's social studies classes. I'm Santa Claus, and I'm really glad to be here today to wish you all a very, very Merry Christmas. And now, you've had some questions, so I'm going to show you some answers. Have a really good time and pay attention. You may hear your name mentioned. Ho ho ho!
Well, hello and Merry Christmas from the North Pole. I'm very pleased to be able to answer some questions for Miss Lather's classes at the Maple Leaf School where everybody's learning social studies. I hear you're learning lots about Canadian geography, and I'm really glad to hear that. The first question I've got on my list is from Jessamine. Jessamine wants to know, what is the most common animal in Canada? Well, Jessamine, the most common animal in Canada is probably the mosquito. And here's a picture from the Arctic tundra showing literally billions and billions of mosquitoes. They're everywhere, and during the summertime, they drive my poor reindeer crazy. But they're not the nicest animal. And Jessamine, you asked for some lovely Christmas flowers. Here is a beautiful bunch of poinsettias, a very common plant that people give to one another at Christmas time. The next question comes from Tony, who wanted to know, what is the biggest animal in Canada? Well, Tony, the biggest animal is probably the moose. If you take a look at this beautiful bull moose, he stands probably a meter and a half to 2 meters high at that shoulder hump and will weigh up to 2,000 kilograms. They can be very, very big animals. If you look at him, he lives in the water, and moose are very gentle for most of the time. However, they can be very dangerous. The next question comes from Cassie, who asked about my reindeer. And here's a picture of some reindeer out on the beautiful tundra. Reindeer are really actually very friendly animals, and they can be trained to pull sleighs. The other thing about reindeers is both the males and females have antlers. As you can see in this picture, that's a male to the left with the really big antlers. Females have typically smaller antlers. I really like my reindeer. They help me to get around. The next question is for Stephen, who says he wants to go to the University of Waterloo, which is a university that's been around since the early 1960s in Waterloo, Ontario. And it's a really nice university, Stephen. Good choice. You've asked for a picture of Kobe Bryant, and here you go, a picture of him with his Lakers uniform. Nicole wants to know, what is the most famous animal in Canada? Well, this is probably one of the most important ones, and I don't know if you know what this is, but that is called a lodge. And that's where these animals live. They live in the water, they eat trees, and they use their tails to help them build lovely dams. And of course, I'm talking about the beaver. Their fur was very important to the Aboriginal people and helped to establish the economy early on in Canada's history. Beavers are big rodents, and they're very friendly animals for the most part. We have lots of beavers all over Canada. The next question comes from Hatham, who asked about the First Nation people and their warriors during the War of 1812. The man on the right is the very important Aboriginal leader Tecumseh, who fought during the War of 1812. And the man on the left is Major General Isaac Brock, who fought for the British in the War of 1812. And they were allies who helped to defend Canada against the Americans. How important are they? Well, 2012, the government of Canada issued a lovely stamp showing both Isaac Brock and Tecumseh on it. And if you take a look at the stamp, it has two parts which make the whole. So they're very, very important. I hope you're being a good boy there, Hatham, and have a very Merry Christmas. Caesar asked a question about the relationship between China and Canada in the past. And China and Canada have had good relations for most of our history. Here's a man that you've probably heard about, but if you haven't, this is Dr. Norman Bethune, who was born in Gravenhurst, Ontario. He served in the Canadian Army during the First World War, and after the war, he went to China. Amongst the very important things he did, he helped to develop mobile blood transfusions so that when people needed blood because of their injuries or for operations, they would be able to get it. And he was very, very important in the People's Revolution in China. Here's a stamp that was issued by China showing you Norman Bethune in China and in Canada. And interestingly enough, his house in Gravenhurst is a national memorial in Canada, and it has lots of Chinese visitors every year. Have a really Merry Christmas there, Caesar. Carl asked a very interesting question. He wants to know what was the first capital city of Canada. And Carl, you have to understand that Canada's history has changed and our capital has changed many times. This is a picture of the Haudenosaunee people, Haudenosaunee people living down in the area now around Montreal, living in a longhouse, and they're Aboriginal people. They had their own system of government. When the French came, they brought their traditions, including their religion and their system of government. And the first capital of New France was in Quebec City, which is a National Historic Site. Now, we think of it as being old. You'd probably laugh because these buildings are about 400 years old. Not very old by Chinese standards. This is Kingston, Ontario, which was the capital of Canada shortly after shortly after the Constitutional Act and Act of Union. And it was the capital, but the problem with it was right very close to the U.S. border. So Queen Victoria chose a different place. And that goes into Curry's question about Canada's government. And our government has its headquarters at this building in Ottawa. It's called our Parliament Buildings. I really like the Parliament Buildings, especially this time of year when they put on their Christmas display. Beautiful lights shining on the building. Have a very Merry Christmas, Curry. And I'd like to say Merry Christmas to everybody in Block B. Our next group are the kids from Block D. And again, I'd really like to say Merry Christmas to everybody in Block D. Rain has asked a question about the rare animals of Canada. This is probably one of the rarest animals. This is a Vancouver Island marmot. There are not very many of them, and they're extremely cute. But unfortunately, they're being threatened by logging and people moving into their environment. This is a marmot mom and baby, and as I said, they're very cute. Rain, have a really Merry Christmas. Keep working hard and doing your best. And I'm glad to hear that Miss Lather says you're a good hard worker. Lyndon asked a question about the flag that looks like the flag of Scotland. Now this is the flag of Scotland. The blue with the big white cross on it, that's called the Cross of St. Andrew. The flag that you're probably thinking of, Lyndon, is this one, the flag of Nova Scotia. And if you notice, the colors are reversed. Nova Scotia means New Scotland, and that's because all sorts of people from Scotland came and settled in that area. When they were looking to together their flag, they thought, we're Scottish, but we're away from home. And so they reversed the colors. And that shield in the middle with the rampant lion, that's the Royal Shield of Scotland, a symbol of Canada. It's not the lion from the Lion King, but there's a lion. The next question comes from Daniel, who wants to know, have I seen the Prime Minister? And yes, I have. This is the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau. He just was elected in October, and he's a very, very nice man. He's working very hard to improve the relationships between Canadians of all different origins, including our First Nations. You have a very good Christmas there, Daniel. Rita asked a question about how do you get around and where do you start delivering your presents? Well, Rita, I actually will start very, very early on Christmas Eve near Vanuatu and Tonga out in the Pacific Ocean. And I then work my way north and south from east to west all over the world. Here's a picture of me flying over southwestern Ontario. And I'm going to point this out right about there where that little arrow is where Miss Lather comes from in Ontario. It's a pretty quick trip, and I'm very, very busy for those 24 hours. Have a very Merry Christmas, Rita. Stephanie has asked a question. What's the city most suitable for living in Canada? And she says she doesn't like the cold. Well, if you don't like the cold, Stephanie, this is the place to go. It's called Victoria, and it's the capital of British Columbia. And it's a beautiful place. The nice thing about it is, very rarely does it get below freezing temperature. Although, it doesn't get very, very hot in the summer either. You also asked, what is Canada's national treasure? And I'm going to tell you, it's the people. There are about 35 million people in Canada. Now, I realize that's very small compared to China, but that's still a lot of people, and they come from all over the world. We have our Aboriginal people, we have our immigrants, and we have the descendants of immigrants. And working together, they've helped to make Canada a really nice place. Perhaps one of these days, you'll be coming to Canada, Stephanie. Have a very Merry Christmas. The next question comes from Crush, who asked, what is the most beautiful park? And I can say without a doubt, Banff and Jasper in Alberta are probably the nicest parks in Canada. This is a lovely picture of Moraine Lake in Alberta, in Jasper Park. And it has lots of forest there for you. I hope you like this picture, Crush. Merry Christmas. Chelsea asked, which city has the highest GDP, gross domestic product? And I'm glad to hear that Miss Lather is teaching you these terms. Well, it would be Toronto, which, even though it's not the capital of Canada, is probably the biggest and most important city in Canada, with a population of slightly more than 5 million people. There's lots and lots of people in Toronto, and it's a very busy and hustling place. Now, you've also asked the question, Chelsea, about the First Nations people. And this is a picture of a place called Attawapiskat. The reality is, some of our First Nations peoples do not have the nicest places to live in. And that's something that our government is trying to address, to improve their standard of living, so that everybody in Canada can have a good life. The next question comes from Mike, and he's asked some very interesting questions, talking about some of the more important ecozones and ecosystems in Canada. Well, Mike, this is a picture of the boreal forest, and you can see lots and lots of trees. pine trees, spruce trees, fir trees. It's very, very thick forest on rolling hills, mainly due to the Canadian Shield, poor drainage, so lots of rivers and lakes. And what is the top consumer in this, the tertiary consumer? Well, that would be the gray wolf. And before people get freaked out, I will tell you that wolves actually are very good animals. They play an important role in the ecosystem, and they typically will leave humans alone unless there's a problem with the wolf. You also asked about the tundra. Well, Mike, the tundra is a very cold environment where the winter lasts easily 10 months of the year. We joke about 10 months of winter and 2 months of lousy sledding. The environment here is very harsh, and so not a lot of animals live on the land. Caribou or reindeer, and there are some small animals. But the bulk of the animals in this area live on the ocean, and the top carnivore in that system are these fellas. The polar bear. There's mom and a couple of cubs, and they eat seals and other marine mammals. Mike, keep working hard, and I hope that you'll get a really good grade. Frisia asked a question about Christmas in Canada and when it first happened. This is a picture of Port Royal and the Good Cheer Club. And if you notice, it's French people, French explorers under Jacques Cartier. And to the right of the picture, you'll notice the Aboriginal people. And Frisia, I've been bringing presents to people across Canada for a long time. The thing that most people really want is to be healthy and to be happy. Charlotte wants to know what war is most important for Canada, and I would say we've had a very important role in the First World War, in the Second World War, but the things that are really important are our peacekeeping missions, and Canada has helped to keep the peace in many countries around the world. What is my favorite animal and food? Well, I really like things like beavers, and I like hamsters and rabbits. They're all great for pets. My favorite food? I like it when Mrs. Claus bakes me some really nice chocolate chip cookies. They're very good. Alex wanted to know when Canada started to celebrate Christmas. Well, Alex, that was when the Europeans arrived in Canada over 400 years ago. They brought Christianity with them. Jay-Z wants to know, when did Canada become a country? How many prime ministers has it had? Since 1867, Canada has had 22 prime ministers, including our most recent prime minister, Justin Trudeau. And Laurel wants to know, why do some people speak English and other people speak French? That's because different people have come to settle in different areas, and the English brought their cultural baggage with them, and the French brought their cultural baggage, their language, their foods, their religion, etc. with them. The interesting thing, Laurel, is not everybody speaks English, not everybody speaks French, and you can hear just about every language in the world being spoken somewhere by people in Canada. There are literally hundreds of different ethnic origins. I love going to places like Toronto or Vancouver, walking down the street and seeing all the different people and listening to them talk. And the last group is Block E. Jake asked, what is the meaning of Christmas? Is it to give a person hope and love? Those are very important things, Jake. You can spend time with your family and you can give them your love. People have asked me, what present do I like the most? I like hugs, because when you give somebody a hug, you're almost guaranteed to get one back. You wanted to know, do I live in Finland? No, Jake, but I've been to Finland many, many times. Helsinki's a really nice place. Lucy has asked, how can I improve my English skills? Well, Lucy, keep practicing, keep talking to people, keep writing to people, talk to Miss Lather, talk to your friends, and you'll get a hang of it. It's a complicated language at times, I know. And you have a really Merry Christmas, Lucy. You're doing a great job in school, and I'm very proud of you. Candace asked a little question about my elves. Now, elves are very camera shy, so this is what you typically see. Little pictures like this, which are caricatures of the elves. You'll notice pointy ears, and they love to dress in green and red. I will tell you, I was able to snap a picture of the elves very quickly one day when we were having a meeting. They weren't too happy about it when they found out about it, but they said, it's okay, Santa. Nobody can really see us in this picture. As I said, they're very shy. Keep working hard, Candace, and you'll have those good grades. Mark wants to know if Christmas is the same in Canada and the United States, and it's very similar, but we do have our differences in Canada compared to the US. A lot of the similar customs are practiced, but in Canada, a lot of people tend to be a little more religious, especially in places such as Quebec, and so they practice their Christmas customs a little bit differently. So, Joanne asked, when did Canada become united at last? Well, it's a big country, and it took a long time to evolve to the map that you see today. That was 1999, so probably right around the time you guys were being born. It took a long time for our country to evolve like this. I hope that you have a good Christmas, Joanne. Mike was asking, how did you get this job? Well, Mike, I got this job from being a happy person and getting the opportunity to do this. I get the best satisfaction from helping other people. What do I do in my free time? I don't have much, but sometimes I do. Carlos wanted to know, why did I become Santa? Well, like I said, I became Santa because that was the thing I was meant to do. The next question comes from Chris, who wants to know about what Christmas is like and why it's a popular festival. Chris, this is a picture of a typical house in Canada with the Christmas lights. And when it's snowy and cold, people like to decorate their houses and have a good time. This time of year, when the days are very short, it's very nice to have the lights up. People like to give presents to one another, warm, furry coats, and they like to get together to have big meals, including delicious ham and turkey, which is absolutely wonderful. Have a very, very Merry Christmas, Chris. Chanwu, I'm glad to hear that school is going well. You asked for a car? Well, this is a Bugatti Aerolith, and that's the best I can do at this time, but it's a very nice car. It's made of magnesium, and it's one of the rarest cars in the world. So I hope you enjoy the picture. And finally, Hannah asked, what do I do the rest of the year? Well, I like to have vacation too. Last year, Mrs. Claus and I went to Hawaii. Sometimes people recognize me because of my beard, and I am a little on the plump side. This was a picture taken of me while I was surfing, and it was lots and lots of fun. But after vacation, it was back to the North Pole, getting ready for another Christmas.
Ho, 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 ho. Well, I hope that answered your questions about Canada. and gave you a little bit more information to help you with your social studies class. I want everybody to say hi to Ms. Lather for me and wish her a Merry Christmas, and to you and to your families all the best. Have a Merry Christmas and have a Happy New Year. As for me, I better get going. I've got a lot of work to do over the next couple of days. Bye! Ho, ho, ho,